Hey guys, tonight we begin with the loud, fragrant, and ever so slightly suspicious world of a 15th century Ottoman marketplace. The Grand Bazaar isn't quite grand yet, not fully covered, still muddy in spots, but it's already a maze of shouting vendors, sizzling kebabs, and one extremely bold monkey wearing stolen earrings. So, before you get comfortable, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to see how far this little corner of the internet reaches. Now, dim the lights, let's ease into tonight's journey together. This is Istanbul, or if you're still waking up in your history knowledge, Constantinople, freshly under new management. The minarets are new, the plumbing is ancient, and the rumor mill spins faster than a dervish on market day. It's a city where a Greek merchant, an Armenian silversmith, and a Kurdish tea seller can all haggle in the same sentence, and all suspect the local tax collector is absolutely robbing them blind. You're a Christian silk trader, Venetian by name, Ottoman by necessity. You rent your stall, count your coins in 3 currencies, and bow just the right amount depending on who's asking. You live in Galata, across the Golden Horn, close enough to trade, far enough to breathe. Your neighbors include a monk with suspiciously nice shoes, and a woman who runs a dye shop and may or may not have invented blue that never fades. This is not the story of wars or sultans. This is your story. The daily, sweaty, cinnamon-scented, bribe-padded grind of someone just trying to sell luxury fabric to people who think you charge too much. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rise before the call to prayer. The sky is still a dusky gray, the streets slick from last night's drizzle. Your boots stick slightly in the mud as you make your way down the hill toward the docks. You have to check on a shipment, bolts of raw silk off a Genoese ship, which absolutely wasn't supposed to dock this far south, and certainly not under that name. The dockmaster is already grumpy. You offer coffee. He asks if it has sugar. You lie and say yes. He drinks it anyway. A stray cat follows you. You don't question this. In Istanbul, cats belong to no one and everyone. They watch trades, steal fish, and silently judge your profit margins. By the time you reach your stall near the spice row, the city is waking up. A Greek boy runs past yelling something about pomegranates. A beggar is already claiming his corner, performing his limp with early morning flair. And you? You're unfurling silk like it's a royal decree. Historians still argue whether silk traders like you were middle class, elite, or glorified delivery boys. The truth is, you're all 3, depending on the day. Some weeks, you dine with an Italian ambassador. Other weeks, you sell to someone who pays you in goat cheese and prayers. You've memorized the feel of each bolt, the whisper of real Chinese silk, versus the slightly smug rustle of Bursa weave. You know which colors sell best before weddings. You know who pretends to browse while actually spying for someone else. You also know the ink is smudged on your import ledger, and the Kada might notice. Again, by midday, your tunic is damp, your patience is thin, and your stomach growls at the smell of fresh simit. You trade 2 coins for 1 and think that simit sellers must be the true economic winners of this city. A bearded man stops to ask where your green silk is from. You launch into your spiel. Imported via Aleppo, died in Edirne, blessed by 3 monks, you made that part up. He haggles, you feign outrage, and eventually he buys the 2 bolts and invites you to tea. You accept. Networking matters. Oh, and the monkey? He's back, with a second earring. The tea shop is tucked beneath a crumbling archway, where the shadows are cooler and the smell of cardamom hangs thick in the air. You duck your head inside, not out of humility, mind you, but because the doorway is exactly 1 inch too low, and you still remember the bruise from last week. Inside, the merchant, Yusuf, you now recall, waves at you to sit on a worn cushion. It puffs out a small cloud of dust and dignity as you settle in. The teacups are chipped, but the tea? Strong enough to reset your moral compass. 1 sip and you forget that Yusuf just underpaid you by half a dinar. He talks, a lot, about his cousin's new camel, about taxes, about a dream he had involving an eagle, a Turkish bath, and 3 goats. You nod politely, smile where appropriate, and pretend to listen while you mentally inventory your stall. You left it with your assistant, a clever boy, if not entirely immune to the temptations of shiny objects or loud distractions. A shadow moves outside. You tense, not out of fear, but out of habit. Istanbul isn't dangerous in the way most people think. You're more likely to be robbed by taxes than by knives. But there are eyes everywhere. Janissaries, rival traders, over-enthusiastic poets with agendas. Yusuf mentions a new caravan arriving tomorrow from Damascus. Spices, glassware, possibly some illicit cinnamon. You act uninterested. He knows you're lying. This is the game. A conversation wrapped in riddles, served with honey-drenched pastries you'll regret later. Historians still argue whether these backroom tea chats shaped trade policy or were just glorified gossip sessions. The truth, as usual, is both. Deals are made here, alliances formed, prices rigged, all under the soothing disguise of hospitality. You return to your stall just in time to see your assistant being mildly scolded by a nun who wanted blue silk, not turquoise. The difference, you explain patiently, is that one flatters her skin tone, while the other makes her look like she's seasick. She buys both. Crisis averted. A group of Genoese sailors passes by, reeking of wine and unfinished arguments. One winks at you. You raise a brow. He reconsiders his life choices. The afternoon heat rises. The shade of your canvas canopy ripples slightly. You take a moment, just a moment, to breathe, to watch the minarets glint, to listen to the clink of coin, the clatter of carts, and the far-off sound of someone trying, and failing, to control a donkey. You remember when you first arrived here, fresh from Venice, wide-eyed, overconfident, sunburned. You thought you'd charm the city. Instead, it smacked you in the face with bureaucracy, humidity, and something suspiciously resembling goat urine. But now the city hums in your bones. You speak its dialects, not just its languages, but its moods. You know when a bribe is expected and when an apology will do. You know who to greet with a bow and who prefers a handshake over a cup of lentil soup. A customer approaches. Older, well-dressed, eyes sharper than a janissary's blade. He doesn't browse, he inspects. Your silk, your hands, your soul, possibly. He asks about your prices. You quote them. He doesn't flinch. You make the sale. He nods once and vanishes into the crowd like a particularly fashionable ghost. You're left wondering what just happened. That, too, is part of the job. You close your stall at sunset. The market shifts tone, louder, hungrier, more prone to singing. Someone plays a lute. Someone else argues with a pigeon. You gather your bolts, lock your chest, and pray no one notices that one corner of your stall leans more than it should. On the walk home, the sky is streaked in rose and gold. Children chase each other with sticks. An old man recites poetry to a fountain. You pass a group of scholars deep in debate. Something about Aristotle and goat anatomy. You don't interrupt. You reach Galata just as the lamps are lit. The smell of grilled fish wafts through the alleys. You nod at the baker, wave at the dye seller, and finally, you unlock your door. The room is small, clean, a little lonely. You light a lamp, set down your ledger, and run a finger over the day's coin haul. Not bad, not great, enough. You pour water into a bowl, wash your face, and say a quiet prayer. Not to get rich, but to get paid on time. There's a difference. And tomorrow, it starts all over again. You wake before the sun, not because you're especially virtuous, but because the neighbor's rooster has no concept of mercy. Istanbul, even in its stillness, buzzes with the promise of a new day. A soft echo of cartwheels, a murmuring prayer, the occasional slap of someone falling off a too steep stoop. You dress quickly. Tunic, vest, a scarf to keep the morning chill off your neck, and, more importantly, to look marginally more interesting than the other 57 silk traders within walking distance. Today, you're meeting a contact from the docks, a Greek man named Leon, who owes you both money and, depending on his mood, mild resentment. The streets are damp with last night's mist. Cats blink at you from rooftops. One of them, a ginger creature with more attitude than fur, trails behind you as if judging your gait. At the port, the world is waking faster than you are. Dock hands shout, ropes groan, crates thud. The smell is, how to put this politely, a cocktail of salt, sweat, fish, and unprocessed ambition. You spot Leon near a stack of crates that may or may not contain glassware and definitely do not contain the apples listed on the manifest. He greets you with a grin that's just a bit too toothy. You exchange pleasantries, the weather, the taxes, the scandal involving a monastery and a very confused goat. Then he gets to the point. A merchant ship from Alexandria arrived last night. It's carrying textiles, incense, and a consignment of dyed cotton that might, with the right sales pitch, pass for silk among less informed pilgrims. You agree to take a look. And that's how you find yourself climbing aboard a vessel that creaks like it's judging you. The captain eyes you warily, but Leon smooths things over with a compliment so flowery it nearly causes an allergic reaction. You inspect the wares. The cotton's good. Not silk, not quite, but dyed well and light enough to pass if the buyer's in a hurry or the lighting is terrible. Historians still argue whether Ottoman port inspections were marvels of bureaucracy or just glorified guessing games. Truth is, it depends entirely on the bribe budget and the inspector's breakfast. You negotiate. You haggle. You pretend not to notice the rat near the anchor chain. Finally, a deal is made. You leave with a sample bolt tucked under your arm, walking faster now. Not because of excitement, but because a suspiciously loud seagull just tried to poop on your dignity. Back at the market, the day has properly begun. The crowds thicken. Shouts rise. Someone is selling dates. Someone else is selling knockoff relics from Noah's Ark, swear on my mother. Your assistant is already at the stall, eyes wide at the new bolt you toss him. He asks if it's silk. You say, "Close enough," and he grins like he understands the business now. A woman approaches. Young, curious, clearly traveling. She asks for fabric to make a veil. You show her options, the rich blues, the delicate, gold-threaded pieces, and yes, the cotton that's pretending to be silk. She picks the latter. You don't feel guilty. You feel effective. You wrap the cloth carefully, toss in a small sachet of lavender, a trick you learned to make fabric smell expensive, and she leaves smiling. Not a bad morning. Midday heat arrives like an overly affectionate uncle. You retreat into the shade of your canopy, sipping watered-down pomegranate juice and pretending not to sweat. Your assistant hums a song with no tune, and you resist the urge to throw a fruit at him. A traveler passes, muttering in Arabic. You catch something about Damascus prices and robbery in daylight. You nod. Some truths cross borders effortlessly. A vendor nearby argues over figs. Another tries to start a juggling act that fails halfway through. Someone drops a coin. 4 children dive for it like it's a holy relic. A passing cleric mutters a prayer and adds a second coin to the scuffle. Istanbul, in all its chaotic, loud, fragrant glory, continues. You take stock of your ledger. Yesterday's gains, today's expenses, tomorrow's hopes. It's not the life you imagined back in Venice. It's better. Harder, yes, but richer in the ways that matter. A janissary walks past. You nod respectfully. He ignores you entirely. That's probably for the best. As the sun dips toward the Golden Horn, you close shop. You leave the stall in the assistant's care, just for an hour. You're meeting someone at a hammam, and no, it's not about bathing. It's about deals, about politics, about pretending not to notice who's spying on whom through the steam. You walk through alleys you know better than your own prayers. Past gossiping grannies, loafing cats, and an argument over whether pickled eggplant is an acceptable breakfast. You reach the hammam just as the call to prayer echoes across the domes. You pause, breathe, and feel once again just how tightly the old city holds you. This is home now. This mess of marble, minarets, and mercantile ambition. This dance of languages and lies, perfumes and power. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow is already waiting. The steam clings to your skin the moment you step into the hammam. It curls around your ears, seeps into your clothes, and fogs your eyelashes until everything feels like it's underwater. The domed ceiling above you filters in soft shafts of sunlight through pierced marble, giving the illusion, however temporary, that you might be in heaven or at least in a better mood. You're not here to relax, at least not primarily. You're here to meet Hassan Effendi, an older Armenian silk wholesaler known for 2 things: impeccable taste and a complete lack of patience. You spot him through the haze, already lounging against the tiles like a man who controls half the textile routes east of the Bosphorus. Which, to be fair, he sort of does. Late, he grumbles without looking at you. You are, but only by a little. Time in Istanbul is fluid. Appointments are more like suggestions dressed in embroidery. You settle opposite him, towel around your waist, manners around your face. A boy appears, pours water, offers rose oil. You both ignore him like civilized people. Then, business. Hassan wants to know why you're pushing dyed cotton as silk. You raise a brow and ask who told him that. He raises both and says, "Everyone." There's no point lying. The grapevine in this city has faster legs than a courier with a debt. You explain it's just 1 bolt, and only to pilgrims, and technically you did mention it wasn't true silk. Eventually, he snorts, but he doesn't look angry, intrigued more like. Hassan doesn't mind cleverness, he minds incompetence. And you, at least today, aren't being incompetent. He leans in. There's a shipment of real silk arriving in 3 days. Chinese, through Aleppo. He wants you in on the deal. Front some coin, take a share, help move the product through your Galata contacts. It's risky. It's tempting. It's exactly the kind of proposal you hoped for when you dragged your sunburned self off that boat years ago. You agree, with the caveat that he lets you test the fabric before money changes hands. Hassan grumbles again. Grumbling is his love language. Historians still argue whether these kinds of partnerships were formal alliances or glorified handshakes over boiled water. Either way, they worked, until they didn't. The hammam grows hotter. You talk politics. The latest edict from the Sultan about foreign traders. The Venetian tax rumors. Whether or not the new mosque will block your stall's morning light. All vital issues. All discussed while sweating like a chicken in a bread oven. You leave the hammam wrinkled, drowsy, and possibly cleansed of sin. Possibly. Depends on your view of last week's pricing stunt. The walk back is quiet. The sun is lowering, casting golden shadows between buildings. You stop at a stall for roasted chestnuts and nod at the vendor, who knows better than to ask questions after hammam meetings. Your assistant waves as you approach the stall. He's been busy. 2 more bolts sold, 1 order for wedding linens, and a love note slipped under the coin box from someone signing only as A.C. You briefly consider all the customers from today whose names might match. You land on 5 possibilities and decide to think about it later. There's an argument nearby between 2 fishmongers over a barrel of eels. You pretend to be fascinated with your own sandal strap to avoid being pulled into it. Back at your place, you count the day's earnings. Enough. You eat cold bread and olives, then spend 20 minutes trying to decipher your assistant's handwriting in the ledger. He writes like a man running from time. Later, you climb to the rooftop. Galata at night glitters in lanterns and laughter. You hear music, a reed flute maybe, drifting across the water from a passing boat. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing off-key. It's awful. It's perfect. You think about Hassan's deal. You think about your old life in Venice, about cobbled alleys, tight shoes, and the cousin who once tried to sell you counterfeit pepper. You don't miss it. Not really. You wonder if the silk will be real, if the price will be worth it, if the tax collector is still watching you. Probably yes, maybe no, definitely yes. A cat joins you on the roof, the ginger one. You hand it a piece of bread. It stares at you like you've personally offended its ancestors. You watch the city breathe. Minarets rise like shadows. Ships bob in the harbor. Voices carry, soft and bright. This world, all of it, rests just enough to remind you it never truly sleeps. And neither do you, not completely. Because tomorrow the game continues. The call to prayer stirs you awake before the sun finishes climbing. It weaves through the quiet streets like incense, steady and low. You groan because your joints ache, and because the bed is warm, and because no one pays a trader enough to wake up this early. But the silk doesn't sell itself. Downstairs, the bread is stale, but the olives are new, and that counts as luxury. You eat quickly, scribble a few notes in the margin of your ledger. Reminder to check on that shipment from Alexandria, and also to find out who AC is before they start writing poetry. Then wrap your robe tightly and head out. The streets of Galata are still stretching. Market women unfold their cloths. Water carriers whistle as they pass. A butcher yawns while sharpening a knife longer than your forearm. The city feels different before the bustle kicks in. Softer, maybe, like it's giving you a chance to escape before it becomes itself again. You stop by the harbor first. The docks are chaos, as always, shouting in 6 languages, crates being hurled with optimism but little aim, seagulls trying to unionize. You scan the horizon for a ship that isn't quite here yet, the one from Aleppo with Hassan's promised silk. No sign of it. Not yet. Instead, you spot a group of Venetian traders, young, too well dressed, clearly new. They walk like men who haven't yet learned that Istanbul will take your confidence and sell it back to you at a markup. One of them recognizes you. He waves uncertainly. You nod back, just enough to remind him you exist and know more languages than he has excuses. You reach your stall and unlock it. The morning light filters through the canvas above you, painting everything in soft gold. You check your bolts, rearrange the more expensive ones up front, and tuck the rougher fabrics behind a stack of dyed wool. Appearances matter. A customer arrives early, a Greek widow who always bargains as if it's an Olympic sport. Today, she wants cloth for her niece's wedding. You recommend something soft, something subtle, something that won't clash with teenage optimism. She chooses purple. You both pretend it wasn't your idea. Historians still argue whether colors held fixed symbolism or changed depending on mood and market. Either way, purple usually meant wealth, or at least someone pretending they had it. Mid-morning brings your assistant, late and smelling faintly of cinnamon and excuses. He claims he was following up on a merchant in Üsküdar. You raise an eyebrow. He crumbles like a poorly baked pastry. Turns out he was with a girl who sells henna by the mosque. You nod slowly and tell him to bring some next time. You send him off with a list. Thread, wax, something about a customer who insists her cloth smells like fish, and return to the business of appearing serene and in control. 2 hours later, a boy arrives with a note. No name, just a symbol, a stylized pomegranate. You know who it's from. The letter is brief. Silk arrives tonight. Late. Warehouse behind the dye house. No questions. You burn it immediately. Dramatic, yes, but it's hard to be careful and theatrical without a bit of fire. The rest of the day drags. Customers come, haggle, leave. You manage to sell 3 bolts of patterned cotton by calling it rare Indian weave and insisting the elephants are good luck. One buyer sneezes on your best shawl. You remain calm, but silently vow to double its price out of vengeance. Late afternoon, you take a break. Tea and dates at the corner stand where the owner pretends to dislike you, but always gives you the sweeter ones. He tells you a story about a cat that's been stealing from his register. You suggest hiring it. When night falls, Istanbul doesn't sleep. It shifts. The songs grow louder, the shadows longer, the deals riskier. You close your stall and head toward the dye house, the long way through back streets and alleys where the cats outnumber the people and everyone minds their own business. The warehouse is dark, but not empty. You see Hassan, arms crossed, flanked by 2 men who look like they lift crates for fun and squash fingers for practice. The silk is there, in tight bales. You run your hands across it, smooth, cool, real. You tug a corner loose and check the weave. Definitely Chinese, possibly legal. You count the bales. 10, as promised. You ask about customs officials. Hassan grunts something about blessings and gifts and changes the subject. You let it slide. You agree on the split. He gets 6, you get 4, but he takes on the risk of customs. You shake hands, not too long, not too short, and part ways. As you walk home, the weight of the deal presses against your shoulders. Not heavy, just present. At home, you pour a glass of wine. Turkish, strong, flavored faintly with rose. You sip slowly, legs tired, eyes gritty, head full. You smile. You're not rich. Not yet. But tonight, you feel like you belong to something. To a city that rewards the bold, punishes the lazy, and occasionally lets a foreigner from Venice carve out a tiny empire of silk and sweat. Tomorrow will bring questions. Taxes. Possibly a nun with fabric complaints. But for now, there is wine. And quiet. And a city that hums below your rooftop like a lullaby in an unfamiliar tongue. The next morning arrives with all the grace of a mule cart hitting a pothole. You're awakened not by birdsong or prayer, but by your neighbor's son loudly attempting to teach his goat to boo. The goat remains unmoved. So do you, at least for a few more groggy minutes. Then the familiar weight of silk, debt, and mild intestinal unrest drags you upright. You throw water on your face, mutter something half religious, half sarcastic, and head out. Today, the streets of Istanbul feel like they've had too much coffee. Everything moves faster. Vendors bark louder. Donkeys trot like they've got deadlines. And someone somewhere is definitely yelling about a chicken that doesn't belong to them. You don't go to your stall yet. Instead, you head to the guild house. Now, calling it a house is generous. It's a converted bathhouse with a leaky roof, a door that sticks, and enough arguing inside to power a small windmill. But it's where silk traders like you go to settle disputes, compare smuggling techniques, subtly, and occasionally vote on matters that will be ignored immediately afterward. Inside, the room smells of sweat, old ink, and hot wax. Men sit cross-legged on cushions or pace like caffeinated philosophers. Someone's reciting fabric weights in Arabic. Someone else is asleep, snoring into a ledger. You're here for one reason: to ensure your name stays off the wrong lists. A merchant named Nabil accuses another named Elias of cutting his silk with flax. Elias responds by suggesting Nabil couldn't tell silk from string if it wrapped around his neck. You avoid eye contact with both. Eventually, an elder, everyone just calls him uncle, waves you over. He's wearing 3 rings, none of which match, and a robe so worn it's basically a memory. He grins with few teeth and tells you he heard you received a shipment. You grin back and say vaguely, "Business is healthy." He nods, then tells you a new tax inspector has arrived from Edirne, young and with the moral flexibility of a steel rod. This is bad news. You thank him and slide a small package under his cushion. Dried figs. Good ones. He smiles wider. You are now, for the next 24 hours, 1 degree safer. Historians still argue whether Ottoman guilds were truly democratic or just tightly choreographed mafias in bathrobes. Honestly, it's both. You leave quickly, dodge a monk chasing a goose, and finally reach your stall just as your assistant is deep in conversation with, "Is that a Flemish nun?" You're not sure whether to be impressed or deeply worried. She's after something modest but radiant. You find a soft cream silk with a subtle vine pattern. She gasps. Your assistant looks smug. You say a small prayer of thanks and then charge her double. The rest of the day rolls by in familiar patterns. More customers, more gossip. A man claims he once sold silk to the Grand Vizier's wife. Another says his cousin was kidnapped by pirates, but came back wealthier and married to one. You nod, appropriately impressed. At lunch, you find a quiet corner near the mosque and unwrap your food. Olives, cheese, and something that used to be bread. Nearby, a poet reads aloud to a very bored-looking cat. You offer the cat a piece of cheese. It declines with dignity. Later, you visit the dyer. He's still wearing gloves stained blue, and still insists that real indigo sings. You nod. He gives you updates. A new shipment of madder root, a batch of silk that turned green instead of red, and a rumor about Spanish agents buying up all the purple dye in Galata. You file that away. As the sun begins its descent, a messenger finds you. This one's official. He bears the seal of the customs office. You feel your stomach shrink. The message is simple. A review of foreign merchants' holdings will be conducted in 2 days. All imports must be declared. Failure to comply may result in... You stop reading. You fold the paper slowly. You keep your face blank. Then you thank the boy, give him a coin, and casually whisper that you hope he doesn't end up like the last messenger. He laughs nervously and runs. You close your stall with care tonight. Every bolt of fabric is accounted for, every corner checked twice. You tell your assistant to take tomorrow off, not because you're generous, but because you can't afford him messing up while inspectors are circling. On your way home, you passed through the old Jewish quarter. Candles flicker behind thick windows. Bread bakes. Children chase each other through laundry lines. You pause to breathe it in, the scent of cumin and wax and domestic chaos. It feels honest. You pass a rabbi reading under a lantern. He glances up and says, "Business or trouble?" You reply, "Yes." He laughs, offers you a date, and reminds you even Solomon had accounts to balance. You walk home a little slower. That night, you do not sleep easily. You count your bolts again in your head. You rehearse explanations, excuses, and, if necessary, emergency bribes. The wine does not help. The lamp sputters. Somewhere, a neighbor's rooster starts crowing far too early. You stare at the ceiling and remember something your father said when you left Venice. Honest trade is like honest love, noble, ideal, and largely theoretical. You smile, then frown, then fall asleep with a dagger tucked under your pillow and a plan half formed behind your eyes. The next morning begins with a clatter. Not the gentle sort, not a spoon in a cup or sandals on stone, but the sharp, suspicious kind. The kind that makes your heart leap into your throat before your eyes even open. You bolt upright. It takes a second to remember. You're not being robbed. It's just your upstairs neighbor dropping a chamber pot again. He has the grip strength of a particularly distracted poet. Still, your pulse stays high as you dress. Today is inspection day. The city smells nervous. Not a real smell exactly, more of a collective mood. People walk a bit faster. Stalls open a bit slower. And eyes. Eyes are everywhere, darting like minnows in a shallow stream. You eat a fast breakfast, if you can call olives and yesterday's bread breakfast, and head toward your stall. On the way, you spot them, the inspectors. 3 of them, robed in bureaucratic beige, moving through the bazaar like low-level weather gods. Behind them, scribes jot feverishly. Ahead of them, merchants fidget. They are young, but clearly enjoying the brief illusion of power. The kind that only lasts until someone higher up blames them for a missing crate. You nod at the dye seller who pretends not to see you. That's fair. You'd do the same. You get to your stall and open it as casually as you can. No sudden movements. Nothing that could be mistaken for hiding something. You've already moved the more creatively acquired inventory to your cousin's place 2 alleys down. You've also made sure that what's left looks good. Too good. Suspiciously organized even. Sure enough, one inspector beelines for you. He's maybe 20. Clean fingernails. Arrogant posture. The kind of man who corrects you when you pronounce your own name wrong. You smile warmly, which is your natural defense mechanism, and offer him tea. He declines, predictably. He begins the inspection. Your assistant hovers nearby, holding a ledger with trembling hands. You wish he wouldn't. He looks guilty even when he's innocent. The inspector picks up a bolt of crimson silk, examines it like it owes him money. You provide details before he asks. Imported from Aleppo, dyed locally, taxed appropriately, kissed by angels. He doesn't laugh. Historians still argue whether these inspections actually curbed corruption or simply added another step to it. Your personal theory? Both. Definitely both. He moves to the next fabric, then the next, then he stops. He's staring at the bolt of deep plum silk, the one dyed with a mix of indigo and something your dyer swore was beetle essence. The dye worked, but the smell didn't quite leave. This, he says, is not on your list. You blink, tilt your head. Then, without missing a beat, you lie. It's a personal gift, for my mother's shawl. He raises a brow. Your mother lives in the city? You nod. Galata loves purple, hates surprises. There's a pause, long enough for a joke to die in. Then, miraculously, the inspector shrugs, marks something, moves on. You exhale in 7 different emotional languages. He finishes the inspection, scribbles more notes, and finally departs without fines, arrests, or soul-crushing lectures. You reward yourself with a candied fig and consider fainting in a dignified position. Later that day, with the inspectors gone and the tension lifting like steam off fresh bread, the bazaar returns to normal. Normal here means barely controlled chaos. You speak with a rug merchant about shipping times. You haggle for a fresh batch of lemon oil to keep moths out of your silks. You listen, always listening, to gossip disguised as greetings. A trader whispers that a Venetian vessel was held up in customs. Another says the Genoese are bribing port clerks with perfume. You file it all away, just in case. By late afternoon, you are visited by someone unexpected, Rafik. He's older now, thinner, walks with a cane, though he doesn't need it. You used to work under him, back when your Turkish was worse and your confidence was somehow even higher. He doesn't say much, just eyes your silks, your stall, your posture. You've done well, he says eventually. You shrug. I've done okay. He nods. Then, I heard about the inspection. You don't ask how. He always knows. He hands you something small, a carved token in the shape of a pomegranate. No explanation. Just presses it into your palm and walks away. It's a mark. Quiet, unofficial, but understood. It means you handled yourself well. You're trusted. For now. You slip it into your pocket like it's nothing. But you feel lighter. Evening comes with a touch of rain. The sky glowers, then softens. The market quiets. You walk home through puddled alleys, the sound of sandals on stone echoing around you. A musician plays a haunting melody on a flute made of bone. You drop a coin into his bowl. He nods without breaking the tune. At home, you light your lamp. The room feels warmer tonight, though nothing has changed. You take out the day's coins, count them slowly, then set them aside. Then you pull out the pomegranate token and turn it in your hand over and over, like a prayer bead. You sleep soundly for the first time in days. Your dreams are quiet that night. No runaway ledgers, no furious nuns or smug inspectors. just the rhythmic flapping of sails and the scent of salt and spice in the air. When you wake, the morning is soft and gray, the kind of sky that makes everything feel like it's been dipped in ash and silk. You arrive at your stall to find your assistant already there, sweeping the dust like he's performing an elaborate courtship ritual with the stones. He says good morning in 3 languages, 2 of which you didn't teach him. That's either impressive or concerning. Maybe both. Today feels slower. Not in the bad way, in the good way. The kind of slow that lets you notice things. The way the gold thread catches in the light, the way customers linger over patterns, the way 2 rival carpet vendors argue like divorced siblings and then split a plate of dates. Trade ebbs and flows like the Bosphorus tide, and today it flows with storytelling. A storyteller has taken up space not far from your stall. Young, animated, voice like honey on fire. He spins tales about a fish that swallowed a sultan's ring, about a djinn that haunts a public bath, about a monkey who became mayor of a village and introduced laundry taxes. That last one might be true. Istanbul has seen stranger things. Crowds gather, not large, but engaged. They listen, they laugh, they cry, though that might just be allergies. You catch yourself listening too, folding silks more slowly, letting the rhythm of his voice stitch itself into your day. You sell a bolt of seafoam silk to a young woman who tells you she's getting married next month. She looks equal parts terrified and thrilled. You wrap the fabric carefully and tuck in a scrap of gold ribbon. She doesn't notice until later. You hope it brings her luck, or at least distracts from whatever her mother-in-law has planned. By midday, the storyteller pauses to drink and stretch. You offer him tea. He accepts. He knows who you are. Says his uncle once bought cloth from you. You nod. You've been here long enough that the city is starting to loop back on itself. You ask where he learned the monkey story. He grins. You won't believe me. You believe him anyway. The 2 of you talk, quietly, about stories, about trade, about truth, and how sometimes a good lie is the best kind of honesty. He says he's leaving for Edirne next week, going to see if the nobles there appreciate irony. You wish him luck. Nobles rarely do. As the crowd thins, you return to business. A Persian merchant browses your collection, fingers brushing the fabric like he's blind and searching for memories. He asks about your dyes. You ask about his route. A deal is struck. Not a large one, but meaningful. The kind that might open a door next month or next year. Historians still argue whether small trade agreements like this one truly influenced the greater economy of the Ottoman Empire. What they forget is that empires are built one handshake at a time. By late afternoon, clouds have gathered like gossiping aunties. You close early. You trust your instincts more than the sky, and the air smells like a warning. You're not wrong. Rain starts just as you reach the stone steps near the Galata Tower. Fat drops pounding down like a drummer testing new rhythms. You duck into a spice shop where the owner is arguing with his cat. The cat is winning. You buy saffron. Not because you need it, but because it feels like a luxury you can afford today. The shopkeeper throws in a pinch of clove for your teeth or your enemies. You're not sure if it's a joke. Back home, you boil lentils, slice onions, and add a little of that saffron just to see what happens. The room fills with warmth. Not just heat, but memory. You remember a dinner years ago with Rafiq before things were complicated. He told you that trade wasn't just about goods, it was about moments. You didn't get it then. You do now. You eat alone, but not lonely. The street below bustles with people rushing through the rain. Somewhere, a boy plays a drum with astonishing enthusiasm and absolutely no rhythm. You smile into your bowl. After dinner, you sort coins, polish weights, and draft a letter to your supplier in Aleppo. You use your best handwriting, the one that says, "I am reasonable but not easily fooled." As the night deepens, you light a candle and sit by the window. The rain has eased to a whisper. You watch it trace silver lines down the tiled rooftops. You think about the storyteller, about the girl with the seafoam silk, about Rafiq's token in your pocket, about the 1,000 small choices that make up a life in this city. You close your eyes, and for the first time in a long while, you allow yourself the luxury of thinking not just about tomorrow's profits, but about tomorrow's stories. The next morning brings with it a thin fog curling like steam through the alleys of Galata. You wake slowly, limbs wrapped in the warmth of sleep and lingering saffron dreams. The city is quieter than usual. Not still, never still, but muffled, as if Istanbul has drawn a thick wool blanket over its own shoulders and is contemplating another cup of tea before facing the day. You dress in layers. The fog is deceptive. Some mornings it burns off into a golden blaze. Other times it settles in, stubborn and damp, like a houseguest who won't take a hint. Your assistant greets you with an eager grin and a mouth full of sesame bread. He's already rolled out half the bolts, bless him, but he's placed the blues next to the purples again, which makes it look like your stall is about to be married off to a peacock. You rearrange them with the kind of gentle scolding that implies future threats of embroidery duty. Not long after, a Greek monk passes through the market. He walks slowly, pausing every few stalls to examine goods and whisper small blessings under his breath, either for the merchants or the merchandise. Maybe both. When he stops at your stall, he fingers the fabric reverently, murmurs something about Solomon's temple, and buys a single strip of crimson brocade. "For the altar," he says, then adds, "or my room. Depends how holy I feel." You give him a discount, not because he's religious, but because he made you laugh. Soon after, your usual clientele starts to filter in. An Armenian widow who smells like rose water and doesn't believe in haggling, a Jewish cobbler who always pays in exact change, and a wealthy Ottoman woman accompanied by 2 servants and 1 sulking teenage daughter. The girl picks out a bolt of moon-colored silk. Her mother insists on mustard. You suggest olive. The argument continues long after they've paid. Midday comes with its usual theater. Children trying to barter marbles for licorice, a goat that somehow got into the fishmonger's cart, and a street poet loudly reciting love verses to a woman who's pretending not to know him. Then Rafiq appears. You notice him before he speaks. Always did. He's dressed modestly today, but well. The kind of modesty that costs real money. His beard is trimmed, his boots dusted. He greets you like no time has passed, though it's been, a year? He browses without buying, asks about your mother, though he knows she passed 2 winters ago, and then, finally, gets to the point. "I have a proposition." "Ah, there it is. A shipment," he says. "East of here. Cotton, some glass, maybe a few sensitive items. He needs a partner, someone discreet. Someone who understands ledgers and customs officers and how to smile at the right bribe without looking like you're enjoying it too much." You listen, nod, ask questions. You're curious but cautious. Rafiq deals in opportunity, and opportunity, you've learned, often arrives with its sleeves rolled up and blood under its nails. Historians still argue whether Ottoman trade in so-called sensitive items was sanctioned by the state or simply tolerated under the right circumstances. But anyone who's ever stood behind a market stall in Istanbul knows better. Commerce flows like water, around laws, under gates, through loopholes you didn't even know existed. You tell Rafik you'll think about it. He accepts that. You always did play the long game. Later, as the sky shifts from pewter to bronze, a small girl runs up to your stall. Breathless, cheeks flushed, she thrusts something into your hand, a folded scrap of parchment sealed with wax. You break it open. It's from the Genoese trader you spoke to last week, the one who barely spoke Ottoman but had very clear ideas about fabric weights and hem tolerances. He's inviting you to dine tomorrow, wants to discuss a larger order. Possibly regular shipments to Genoa. Possibly much, much more. You fold the note slowly, feeling the weight of it settle in your palm. The day ends with a golden spill of sun across your booth. Your assistant is singing, badly, as he rolls up the final bolts. You let him. The notes are flat, but the heart is right. As you lock the chest, sweep the stones, and fold away the signs, you think, today was a day made of choices. Some small, some not so small. All of them, somehow, weaving together into the fabric of your strange, beloved life. That night, back in your room, you light the lamp and set the Genoese letter beside your ledger. Next to it, you place a fresh sheet of parchment and write one word at the top. Rafik. You don't write anything else. Not yet. You look out the window as the fog rolls back in, not hiding the city, but softening it. Dimming the sharp edges, quieting the noise. You can just make out the shape of the Hagia Sophia in the distance, its great dome barely a silhouette in the night. Somewhere out there, Rafik is planning. Somewhere else, a Genoese merchant is dreaming of gold thread and steady supply lines. And here you are, in between. A trader, a listener, a weaver of silk and stories. You dip your pen in ink, and you wait. You wake before the first call to prayer, the sky still holding tight to the last shreds of night. There's something about a decision lingering overnight that makes sleep feel like chewing old bread. Dense, unsatisfying, and oddly damp. You rise with a quiet sigh, splash your face with cold water, and look at the names still sitting on your desk. Rafik, Genoa, both written in neat, practiced strokes, both heavy with implication. Today, you dress a little finer. Not to impress necessarily, but to control the impression. You pick the burgundy sash with the subtle gold weave. Serious, but not boastful. Reliable. The kind of fabric that says, I will not cheat you unless you deserve it. Outside, the streets of Galata are already stirring. Bakers stoke ovens. Peddlers bellow half-heartedly about chestnuts and waxed lemons. A man with an accordion is playing something mournful and off-key. You nod to him on your way past. He winks mid-sigh. You open the stall, your assistant trailing behind, arms full of silk and optimism. He's humming again. You don't stop him. There are worse sounds to start a day with. Coughing, for instance, or the clatter of tax officials. Soon enough, business begins. A quiet stream of regulars, a few curious tourists, a wealthy woman from Damascus who speaks 5 languages and negotiates in 6. She buys 3 bolts of indigo, compliments your stall's minimalist symmetry, and suggests you visit her cousin's bathhouse next time you're in Aleppo. Then, just as you're rearranging your display of saffron-toned silks, the Genoese merchant arrives. He's punctual, shaved, and dressed like a man who has to regularly apologize for being rich. His boots shine. His accent is less terrible today. Either he's practiced, or he's brought a translator. You're mildly disappointed when it turns out to be the latter. The translator is a grim Armenian man who translates with all the emotional range of a turnip. Still, the Genoese gets to the point quickly. He wants consistency, large quantities, a trade relationship, regular shipments, predictable pricing, no surprises. You counter with flexibility, control over suppliers, premium for rush orders, a guarantee of exclusivity for your silks in his region. There's a moment of tension, not a conflict, more like the stretching of a bridge between two cities. Then he nods. So do you. The translator blinks slowly, as if witnessing actual feelings would break his brain. You draft a preliminary agreement. He'll send a ship every 2 months. You'll guarantee at least 4 types of silk per shipment. In return, he offers access to Genoese dyes, some finer tools, and, more importantly, connections. Letters of introduction. Open doors in places you've only dreamed of sending your goods. It's a good deal. Not perfect, but good. Historians still debate how much of the Ottoman Empire's textile trade depended on these informal pacts between individual traders, beyond the control of the court. Some argue that the empire's true strength was not in bureaucracy, but in these human fibers of trust and risk, spun daily in the markets of cities like Istanbul. After the Genoese leaves, you don't celebrate. You don't frown either. You just breathe. The kind of breath that knows something has shifted. Not a storm exactly, but a current. Rafik arrives that evening. You're still at your stall, packing the final rolls into their chests. He doesn't say hello, just picks up a scrap of emerald silk and lets it fall between his fingers like water. You met with him, he says. You nod. He doesn't look surprised. And you shrug. It's a start. He smiles faintly. I suppose you want more time. You laugh quietly. I always want more time. Then he tells you what he should have said yesterday. The shipment includes books, rare ones, banned in some provinces, prized in others, writings from Andalusia, diagrams of stars, medicinal texts that could cure or kill depending on dosage and who's reading. Suddenly, it's not just about silk and coin. It's about ideas, forbidden knowledge, dangerous hope. You tell him you'll think about it. Again. He nods. You both know you're not saying no. That night, you walk the long way home, past the spice market, past the dye vats, past a cat sitting on a rug like it owns every corner of the empire. You stop at the edge of the Galata Bridge, where the water glimmers under moonlight and the sound of waves whispers like secrets. The city is lit in lanterns and arguments and quiet laughter. Somewhere, someone is playing a flute. You think about Genoa, about Rafik, about whether you're becoming too careful or not careful enough. And you think, not for the first time, that trade is less about goods than it is about risk. You buy, you sell, you gamble. Sometimes with coins, sometimes with your future. You turn back toward home, the Genoese contract tucked safely in your satchel. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll answer Rafik. Tonight, you sleep. Not soundly, but with purpose. The next morning, there is no dramatic sunrise. Just light. Pale, unbothered light leaking through your shutters like an overfamiliar guest. You wake up feeling like a coin rubbed thin. Still functional, still valuable, but not exactly shining. You decide, today, to go to the docks. It's a calculated move, of course. You're not there to take in the briny breeze or admire the gulls' interpretive screaming. You're there to verify, to watch, to confirm that Genoese ships arrive when they say they will, and to see who else is watching them. You walk with your satchel slung low, a thick scarf around your shoulders to hide your nicer tunic. No need to advertise. The streets from Galata to the docks are lively, gritty, and weirdly fish-scented, as usual. You pass two street preachers arguing about St. Paul, a toothless woman selling pastries stuffed with something aggressively spiced, and a boy trying to convince a chicken to go somewhere it clearly does not want to go. At the docks, you melt into the crowd. Traders, dockhands, guards, a random lute player, and a dog that looks like it has tenure. And then you see it, the Genoese vessel. White sails trimmed in red, a lion crest stitched into the main banner. It looks like it was designed to colonize something, even if only your patience. You count crates being offloaded, silks from Italy, dyes in heavy barrels, letters handed discreetly from gloved hands to calloused ones. You watch the faces. No smiles, but plenty of nods. This is business, not theater. You don't approach. You don't need to. You watch the rhythm, the speed, the lack of panic. It's a good sign. Predictability in trade is more valuable than gold, and far rarer. Then a familiar figure catches your eye. Rafik. Of course, he's not watching the Genoese. He's watching a different ship entirely. One with no flag, no name, and a crew that unloads quickly and talks less. You can tell the difference. Legitimate trade smells like sweat and citrus. Whatever this is smells like secrets and gunpowder. You don't wave, you observe. It's what you're good at. A voice beside you, low, amused, says, "You look like a man watching too much and saying too little." You glance sideways. It's Naima, the scribe's daughter. She's dressed plainly, but her eyes are sharp as ever. You'd forgotten she sometimes helps catalog foreign inventories. An official excuse to learn languages, though you suspect she's actually working for someone far more curious than the customs office. "You're one to talk," you murmur. She shrugs. We all watch someone. It's just rare when two watchers notice each other. You both turn back to the docks. She points, subtly, to one of the crates being offloaded from the nameless ship. "That," she whispers, "is bound for a scholar in Edirne." He requested copies of ancient Indian surgical texts. In Greek, you arch a brow. Why in Greek? She smiles faintly. Because that's the only way they'd get past inspection. You say nothing, but your brain, already tired, begins rearranging its mental ledger. Rafik might not be smuggling weapons or heresy. He might be smuggling knowledge. Later, over coffee, the real stuff, thick enough to stand a spoon in, Naima says, "You could do both, you know. Genoa and Rafik." You shake your head. That's how people end up on the wrong end of a very complicated dagger. She grins. Only if they forget which promises matter most. That afternoon, back at your stall, the city is quieter. The call to prayer echoes off the tiled roofs. Your assistant is counting dye samples again, pretending to understand which ones are warm and which are cheerful. You think about Naima's words, about Genoa's offer, about books hidden in crates. You look at your hands, steady, calloused, stained with ink and dye and decision. Historians still argue whether the traders of early Ottoman Istanbul were agents of empire or quiet revolutionaries, whether they built bridges for commerce or corridors for ideas. Most likely, it was both. That evening, you make your choice. You draft 2 letters. One to Genoa, confirming the shipment schedule and requesting additional tools. The other to Rafik, accepting his proposal, with conditions. No explosives, no poisons. Books only. You're a traitor, not a martyr. You leave both letters with a trusted courier, pay extra for silence, and head home beneath a sky brushed in pale lavender and amber. Dinner is lentils and olives. Simple, honest, affordable. You sit by the window and watch the lamps flicker across the water. You wonder who else, tonight, is sitting by a window and wondering if they've chosen correctly. You don't know the answer, but you do know this. Your world is bigger now, and it's not going back. The next morning, there is no dramatic sunrise, just light. Pale, unbothered light leaking through your shutters like an overfamiliar guest. You wake up feeling like a coin rubbed thin. Still functional, still valuable, but not exactly shining. You decide, today, to go to the docks. It's a calculated move, of course. You're not there to take in the briny breeze or admire the gulls' interpretive screaming. You're there to verify, to watch, to confirm that Genoese ships arrive when they say they will, and to see who else is watching them. You walk with your satchel slung low, a thick scarf around your shoulders to hide your nicer tunic. No need to advertise. The streets from Galata to the docks are lively, gritty, and weirdly fish-scented, as usual. You pass two street preachers arguing about St. Paul, a toothless woman selling pastries stuffed with something aggressively spiced, and a boy trying to convince a chicken to go somewhere it clearly does not want to go. At the docks, you melt into the crowd. Traders, dockhands, guards, a random lute player, and a dog that looks like it has tenure. And then you see it, the Genoese vessel. White sails trimmed in red, a lion crest stitched into the main banner. It looks like it was designed to colonize something, even if only your patience. You count crates being offloaded, silks from Italy, dyes in heavy barrels, letters handed discreetly from gloved hands to calloused ones. You watch the faces. No smiles, but plenty of nods. This is business, not theater. You don't approach. You don't need to. You watch the rhythm, the speed, the lack of panic. It's a good sign. Predictability in trade is more valuable than gold, and far rarer. Then a familiar figure catches your eye. Rafik. Of course, he's not watching the Genoese. He's watching a different ship entirely. One with no flag, no name, and a crew that unloads quickly and talks less. You can tell the difference. Legitimate trade smells like sweat and citrus. Whatever this is smells like secrets and gunpowder. You don't wave, you observe. It's what you're good at. A voice beside you, low, amused, says, "You look like a man watching too much and saying too little." You glance sideways. It's Naima, the scribe's daughter. She's dressed plainly, but her eyes are sharp as ever. You'd forgotten she sometimes helps catalog foreign inventories. An official excuse to learn languages, though you suspect she's actually working for someone far more curious than the customs office. "You're one to talk," you murmur. She shrugs. We all watch someone. It's just rare when two watchers notice each other. You both turn back to the docks. She points, subtly, to one of the crates being offloaded from the nameless ship. "That," she whispers, "is bound for a scholar in Edirne." He requested copies of ancient Indian surgical texts. In Greek, you arch a brow. Why in Greek? She smiles faintly. Because that's the only way they'd get past inspection. You say nothing, but your brain, already tired, begins rearranging its mental ledger. Rafik might not be smuggling weapons or heresy. he might be smuggling knowledge. Later, over coffee, the real stuff, thick enough to stand a spoon in, Naima says, "You could do both, you know, Genoa and Rafik." You shake your head. That's how people end up on the wrong end of a very complicated dagger. She grins. Only if they forget which promises matter most. That afternoon, back at your stall, the city is quieter. The call to prayer echoes off the tiled roofs. Your assistant is counting dye samples again, pretending to understand which ones are warm and which are cheerful. You think about Naima's words, about Genoa's offer, about books hidden in crates. You look at your hands, steady, calloused, stained with ink and dye and decision. Historians still argue whether the traders of early Ottoman Istanbul were agents of empire or quiet revolutionaries, whether they built bridges for commerce or corridors for ideas. Most likely, it was both. That evening, you make your choice. You draft 2 letters. One to Genoa, confirming the shipment schedule and requesting additional tools. The other to Rafik, accepting his proposal, with conditions. No explosives, no poisons. Books only. You're a trader, not a martyr. You leave both letters with a trusted courier, pay extra for silence, and head home beneath a sky brushed in pale lavender and amber. Dinner is lentils and olives. Simple, honest, affordable. You sit by the window and watch the lamps flicker across the water. You wonder who else, tonight, is sitting by a window and wondering if they've chosen correctly. You don't know the answer, but you do know this. Your world is bigger now, and it's not going back. The street swallows you again. No one stops you. No one questions. Later, in the quiet of your home, you unlock the crate again. Just to look, to make sure it's real. The weight of centuries of knowledge sitting on your floor like a petulant goat daring you to underestimate it. You wonder, who will read these books? Will they survive the next fire, the next flood, the next whim of a sultan who dislikes diagrams? You don't know. But for now, they're safe. And that is enough. 2 nights later, the city feels restless. The moon hangs low over Istanbul like it's eavesdropping. Lamps flicker along the alleys, casting shadows that twist like silk in the breeze. You're not working tonight. No haggling, no customers. Just a slow dinner, a warm drink, and the humming anticipation of a trade completed. Mostly. The crate sits at the edge of your room, sealed again under a plain canvas cover. It doesn't look like a treasure, that's the point. You've sent word to Genoa. The books are secured. You used 5 different runners, each with a different fragment of the message. Not that you don't trust them, just that you don't trust anyone entirely. It's good practice, like washing fruit from the docks twice. Your assistant is off tonight, visiting family across the Golden Horn. You told him to take the long way and not to ask why. He didn't. You're starting to think he might actually survive in this business. A knock. Software 3 taps, a pause, 2 more, the signal. You open the door to find Rafik, drenched from the neck down. It hasn't rained. You don't ask. Change of plan, he says. Of course. A Venetian vessel left early, he explains. Your Genoese contact had to adjust. The books will leave via a monk, a Dominican no less. Trusted by all, questioned by none. Unless someone actually reads Latin, of course. The plan is simple. You bring the crate to the monastery of St. Paul, tucked just outside the Theodosian walls. The monk takes it from there. You're to arrive before dawn under cover of prayer. You look at the crate, then at Rafik. You owe me a week of backgammon and a lifetime supply of halva, you mutter. He grins. Deal. You don't sleep. There's no point. You wrap the books again, double-check every knot, every label, every trick compartment. You whisper a few choice words to the lock, not spells, just threats. The cart creaks as you roll it through the sleeping city. The streets are nearly empty except for cats and bad decisions. The cold nips your fingertips. Somewhere in the distance, a drunk janissary sings a song that rhymes justice with pigeon. You keep your head low as you pass Hagia Sophia. The domes are dark, the air heavy with old prayers. The guards at the walls don't stop you. You're just another early vendor, with a suspiciously heavy cart. You reach the monastery just as the first call to prayer begins to stir across the rooftops. The monk is waiting, tall, silent, wrapped in wool robes that smell faintly of cloves. He doesn't speak, just lifts the crate with surprising ease and nods once. And just like that, it's gone. All those books, all that knowledge, centuries of thought, of ink, of effort, off to who knows where. You're left with an empty cart and the feeling that something very large just passed through your very small life. Historians still argue whether smugglers like you were heroes of learning or just lucky opportunists. Whether those books changed anything, or if they ended up in the back of someone's wine cellar, never read, slowly eaten by mice. You'll never know. But you like to think a scholar, somewhere, someday, will open one and say, "Whoever brought this here was smarter than they looked." You turn the cart around and walk slowly back through the waking streets. The sun is starting to rise. The sky glows orange over the Bosphorus. Fishermen call to each other. Bread sellers shout the day's first prices. A boy offers you a boiled egg for a copper coin. You buy two. One for you, one for the pigeons. You sit on a stone bench, peel your egg, and look around at your city. Yours, not because you own it, but because it has owned you in the best possible way. You're not rich, not powerful, not famous. But this morning, you did something that matters. And sometimes, that's more than enough. The next few days blur like ink on damp parchment. Without the crate, your life returns to its normal rhythm. But not quite. There's something off, like a lute just slightly out of tune. You restock your stall with bolts of silk in gentle greens and sea blues. You chat with old customers. You re-haggle with the tax collector, who has grown increasingly suspicious that you've discovered a loophole he hasn't. You have. You just aren't sharing. Still, your eyes drift more often to the edges of the crowd, to the alley corners, to the rooftops where shadows stretch just a little longer than they used to. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrives. Not delivered by courier, not sealed with wax, just folded neatly beneath a cushion in your stall between a spool of violet thread and a surprisingly well-behaved lizard. It's written in Latin, then crossed out and scribbled again in bad Greek. They arrived. Well received. Much appreciated. Consider your name. Remembered. There's no signature, no date, but your fingers know the handwriting. Genoese, definitely. Possibly your contact's wife. She had neater letters and better taste in ink. You burn the message after reading it twice. Not because you're afraid, but because that's what you've always done. Fire is the final page of every risky deal. The city, meanwhile, goes on pretending nothing has happened. Merchants hawk spices. Children pelt each other with pomegranate seeds. Poets try and fail to impress laundry workers with rhyming couplets about soap. Istanbul does not care what you've done, which is somehow the greatest compliment it can pay. And yet, small things begin to shift. A wealthy Greek trader stops by and asks for the Venetian with the good prices and suspiciously accurate maps. You sell him silk. No maps, yet. Later, a young scholar from Andalusia approaches your stall. He doesn't buy anything, just asks, quietly, if you know where to find works by Avicenna. You don't answer. You hand him a roll of cinnamon and tell him to come back when he can afford fabric. But still, word spreads. You've become a node in a quiet network, a silk trader on the surface. Beneath it, a whisper, a page turned, a book never officially catalogued. Historians still argue whether knowledge traveled faster through conquest or commerce, whether it was monks or smugglers who saved the ancient world from total intellectual ruin, whether Istanbul was a crossroads or a filter. You, personally, prefer the term gateway. It sounds romantic, doesn't it? And you are now part of that gateway. Not the whole door, maybe, but at least the hinge. It's not without risk. A janissary has been hovering near your stall more than usual. Not doing much, just watching. You offer him tea. He declines. You offer again. He accepts. You bond over how both your mothers think your jobs are ridiculous. Later that week, you get a delivery of silk you didn't order, from a port you don't remember dealing with. Inside one of the bolts, hidden like a pearl in an oyster, is a scroll. You don't read it. Not yet. Because right now, you're busy wrapping a bundle for a visiting Mongol diplomat's wife. She likes fabrics that change color in the sun. You oblige. Across the square, Yusuf is arguing with a donkey again. You suspect the donkey is winning. You hand the bundle to the woman, smile, and watch as she disappears into the bustle. The city breathes. So do you. Night falls. Lanterns light. Somewhere, a cat knocks over a pottery stand and walks away without remorse. And you? You sit back, sip lukewarm tea, and think about how far one crate of books has carried you. The morning air smells like smoke, salt, and freshly baked simmet. Your stall is already open. The canopy flaps gently above you, stained in a dozen shades of dye from markets past. There's a small nick in the table leg now, courtesy of a runaway goat yesterday. You've given up fixing it. It adds character. Today, you're selling more than silk. You're selling calm, confidence, a reputation. A Persian merchant stops by and asks if the rumors are true, that you once out-bargained a Venetian for lapis lazuli. You grin and shrug. You never confirm. You only allow legend to do its work. You've become a fixture in this part of the market. People nod when they pass. The bread seller sets aside a roll for you before sunrise. Even the grumpy tax clerk sometimes lets a mistake slide, especially if you bring him almond sweets. But beneath it all, the web continues to grow. The scroll from last week still lies in the corner of your chest, unopened, not from fear, from patience. You know the rhythm now. Istanbul doesn't shout secrets, it hums them. Eventually, you do read it. It's not a map, not a list, not a message. It's a commentary on Aristotle, a forgotten one, annotated in two hands centuries apart. The first half discusses natural movement. The second, unnatural silences. It makes you pause. You wrap it in fabric, place it back into your chest, and say nothing to anyone. Later that day, a boy delivers a bundle of yellow dye you never ordered. Tied to it is a sprig of rosemary. You nod, then hand the boy a coin. He vanishes down the alley like smoke. Historians still debate how underground networks in the Ottoman Empire communicated, whether through coded letters, folk songs, or delivery mistakes that weren't mistakes at all. You personally lean toward rosemary. And then there's the nun. Yes, her again. The one who didn't know the difference between blue and turquoise. She returns not to complain, but to buy more. This time she asks questions about Venice, about old roads, about where knowledge comes from and who decides what's forbidden. You answer carefully. Turns out she knows Greek better than you thought. Also turns out she's not a nun. You don't ask what she is. She thanks you and leaves. That night, you walk along the harbor. Lanterns sway on boats, casting gold ripples across the water. A musician plays a mournful tune nearby. You think about your family in Venice, about the books you've smuggled, the languages you've heard, the ones you'll never master. You wonder if you'll ever leave this city. The answer is no, or maybe not yet, because for now, Istanbul holds you. Like a book whose final page you haven't read, like a map with one street always smudged out. You're too curious, too invested, too charmed. You pause at your door, watching a shadow pass under a nearby arch. Is it danger? Opportunity? A friend? You smile. In Istanbul, it's often all three. You enter, lock the door, light the lamp. Tomorrow, a caravan from Samarkand arrives. Tomorrow, another scroll. Tomorrow, a question no one dares ask aloud. But tonight, you sleep. And so ends your day. Not as a Christian trader, not as a Venetian exile, not even as a seller of silk, but as a keeper of small truths. A quiet rebel in robes of gold and green. A hinge in the great, creaking gate of history. Now, take a slow breath. Let the clamor of the market fade. The voices, the coins, the clattering hooves. Let them drift further and further away, like boats on the Bosphorus disappearing into morning mist. The night wraps itself around the city like velvet. The minarets glow faintly under the stars, and even the wind quiets down to listen. You're home now, your feet tucked under a warm blanket, your eyes heavy, your heart steady. There's nothing left to count, nothing left to plan. Just the soft rustle of silk in the dark, the fading memory of cardamom tea, and the faint impression of cobbled streets underfoot. You've walked them enough for today. Let your breath slow, like the tide easing into shore. Let your thoughts quiet, like a page being gently turned. Tomorrow the story continues, but tonight you rest, because you've earned it. Good night, merchant. Good night, Istanbul.